Welcome, brave souls, to Fear File Chronicles, your one-way ticket to spine-chilling stories and terrifying tales. Tonight, we'll be diving into the darkest corners of the human mind with the story, After the Fall, Part 1, penned by the twisted mind of Locked 334. Together, we'll explore the unexplained and face our deepest fears. But before we begin, if you enjoy trembling in terror, be sure to hit that like button. Share this video with your fellow fear fanatics and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to click the bell notification so you never miss an eerie episode. Your support truly means the world to us. So feel free to leave a comment below to join the Fear File Chronicles community. Now, without further ado, let's unravel the mysteries of the unknown together as we delve into tonight's fear-inducing story, After the Fall, Part 1. Dim the lights and prepare yourself for a chilling journey into the Fear File Chronicles. A soft breeze brushed against his face. The August sun still warmed his cheeks. Collin lay amongst the brush of what once was a cornfield, the world around him quiet and peaceful. His mother called his name from the back porch, rousing him from his daydream. He stood up, glancing across the field to see her gesturing for him to return. His feet had to make long strides to avoid the brush, and often he stumbled. His mother's calls grew more urgent, and the tone in her voice made him look up again. He watched as several bright streaks of light tore through the clouds above him. Jolting from his dream, Collin's breath came out in erratic bursts at first, but calmed quickly. It was the same dream, night after night, a relic of the life he once had. He would think back to his family and his tiny, single-wide trailer, placed in an old cornfield in a tiny Alabama town. Even the name of the place was now a ghost to him. All that remained was ash, and names meant little. His hands wiped at the dust on his pale face and slowly rose from his makeshift bed. He knew he was somewhere between Georgia and North Carolina, but that was as accurate a guess as he could make. The world had become so much different after the fall. He collected his things in the olive-drab satchel he had found among the debris of his father's belongings. There was little to save, but he managed to salvage some clothing and canned goods. It took him a long time to leave town, but when he realized that no help was coming, he knew he had to seek it himself. He had learned a lot in the few months he had been alone, being cautious being the most important. Collin stepped out of the gaping hole within the half-broken grocery store he had taken shelter in, just as the sun began to light the sky. The color was distorted to crimson through the haze that remained in the air, but he knew it was dawn. Collin removed his father's survival guide from the pack before slinging it on his back. He had read it multiple times, along with a Bible his grandmother had given him. They were the only two books he had been able to save from his home. For that, he had been lucky. One kept him sane and the other kept him alive. He tried to remember the things his father had taught him, and wished he had paid more attention. His feet shuffled through the debris of another tiny town that no longer had a name. It had been weeks since he had seen another person, which at first had frightened him, but now was a relief. When Collin was young, he always thought that most people were good. He had the naive notion that if he truly needed help, he could find it within walking distance. His neighbors had always seemed like nice people. His dream was shattered after the event. It was shocking to learn what lengths people would go to in order to survive. He had witnessed his old bus driver put a bullet in a woman's head for a can of SpaghettiOs. There was no going back after that. He couldn't even remember the last time he had spoken. He let his father's 9mm Beretta do the talking. By the time the sun was directly overhead, he came upon a large sign that read, "Welcome to South Carolina." Collin stood stoic, the words almost alien to him. He had never been this far from home. He had tried to find his aunt in Georgia, but the landmarks had been so distorted from the damage he could not discern his true location. Everything was burnt and broken, even him. He brushed away tears from his eyes as he continued forward into the blank canvas before him, wondering if anything would ever be created here again. Cars lined both lanes of the highway he walked. Bodies lay frozen in time within each seat. The television broadcast had told large cities to evacuate, and they all tried. What the report did not inform them of was the fact that there was nowhere to run to. Collin stopped to examine each vehicle, looking for anything useful. His eyes rested on a small car seat in the back of an SUV. The skeletal remains of a child, still secured tightly inside. His fingers brushed across his face, feeling the scars from his own burns and thinking of his younger brother. He had to shake off his despair. He could not break down in the open. It wasn't safe. Nowhere was. Collin walked through what was probably once a bustling main street, greeted by crumpled buildings at every step. The sun was setting, and he knew he would need shelter. The night brought its own dangers. The more troublesome members of society had taken over the dark. Most had learned that people moved at night to avoid detection and had started hunting in the twilight hours. He made sure not to be their prey, finding shelter in an abandoned gas station. He had always hated the dark, but this was different. Now that the moon no longer guided the night, it was like being plunged into oblivion. His body curled up behind a crumpled countertop, resting his head upon his satchel. Clouds rolled in the distance, tinted purple by the ash of the sky. He could smell the tainted moisture that filtered the air. There was a storm on the horizon, which meant there would be less movement in the night. The raging of Mother Nature used to frighten him as a child, but it was a shield in times like these. Collin knew he would be able to sleep soundly for the first time in over 2 weeks. His lips curled slightly into a smile as lightning split the sky. His eyes fluttered in the darkness, and he was lulled to sleep by the rhythm of thunder. His younger brother Danny pounced on him, reminding him that Saturday morning cartoons were on. Collin rubbed the sleep from his eyes and made his way to the living room. With a click of the remote, he appeased his brother and yawned as he walked to the kitchen. He made them both a bowl of Lucky Charms and sat quietly until his parents woke up. They sat and giggled with each other at the antics on screen until their fun was disrupted by an emergency broadcast. Tornado sirens wailed in the distance, but Collin saw no clouds out the window across from them. The sound startled his mother, and soon both his parents stood beside them, their eyes fixed on the screen. It was their first warning of what was to come. Collin was startled by the sound of rustling within the gas station. He pulled the pistol from his coat and moved around the counter cautiously. The sun had not come up yet, and visibility was poor. His pale blue eyes were even worse for seeing in this darkness, but his ears had become sharp. The sound of cans and bottles being rummaged through were like a beacon he honed in on. When he was sure he knew where the intruder was, he lifted his gun to aim. The sound of the safety releasing caused the figure to pause, dropping their loot. They did not move, and Collin froze as well, unsure if they had a weapon. His body shook as he slowly applied pressure to the trigger.
"Please, if you have a gun, don't shoot."
A child's voice rang out.
"I am just looking for food, not trying to start any trouble."
A raspy voice replied,
"Is there anyone with you?
"No, sir, I'm alone."
Then take what you need and leave. That's your last warning."
Tiny feet shuffled in the darkness, grabbing at unseen things. Sounds traced a path until exiting the store. The steps receded into the distance, then vanished. Even then, sleep did not return. Instead, the man named Collin sat, his grip tight on his weapon, waiting for the light of day. With daylight, he saw the mess left behind. Empty shelves and toppled goods told a tale of desperate searching. He felt a twinge of guilt, but he had seen enough. Children had become lures for traps set by merciless adults. He couldn't afford to fall for such tricks. Once the surroundings were clear, Collin ventured outside. A pistol swung in his hand, scanning the vicinity. He found no trace of the child in the nearby cars or around the small building. His eyes fell on a newspaper stand. The same headline, "The End," stared back at him from dusty pages. He wondered if there were still papers being printed somewhere. He longed for a different story to read. Collin remembered the catastrophe as explained by various sources. Large asteroids had bombarded the Earth, disrupting satellites and causing widespread destruction. These asteroids caused asteroid airbursts, leveling structures and uprooting lives. The resultant chaos and lack of communication had brought civilization to its knees. And the world, as he knew it, had changed irrevocably. A tattered road atlas provided a sense of direction. He avoided large cities and major highways due to the danger they posed. He thought he was somewhere north of Augusta, Georgia, near Clarks Hill, South Carolina. He didn't have any family to return to, or at least none he had found. His only plan was to head north, towards a rumored sanctuary in Canada. He replaced the map and began walking. He missed his stolen bicycle. He thought of his 10th birthday when his father had presented him a 10-speed bike. How he had ridden it into the night, until his mother called him in. His growling stomach broke his reminiscence. He reached for a bag of beef jerky, the salty speck of a tear falling on his hand. Teriyaki, his father's favorite. Ahead lay an intersection, usually a point for him to reassess his route. Something felt wrong about this one, though. An unusually large number of abandoned cars filled the crossroads. A blockade was clear, constructed of vehicles including an overturned school bus. Despite the apparent stillness, danger lurked. He took cover, choosing to follow the road from the cover of the trees. His progress was cautious and silent. His heart echoed in his ears, the sound amplifying his sense of danger. He had to continue. The risk of getting lost was far too great. Suddenly, voices floated to his ears. Something was happening just beyond bus, but he couldn't see. Collin got a clearer view from behind a van. 3 men, weapons in hand, were harassing a young boy. The boy's possessions scattered on the ground, his backpack torn open. Collin recognized the voice from the night before. He felt an urge to intervene, but stopped as he noticed the shotgun one of the men held. Each man was armed, 2 with hunting rifles and 1 with a shotgun. His stealthy approach had only been possible because they were distracted. He grappled with his conscience, the child's cries echoing in his ears. Suddenly, one of them aimed a pistol at the back of the boy's head. One of the men yelled,
"What are you doing, Earl?"
He's got nothing we want, and he's gonna die out here anyway.
The other answered. Suddenly, Collin was in motion. He rounded the bus, safety off, bullets flying from his pistol. The leader discharged a shot into the air before he fell. The boy lay on the ground, covering his ears, crying. Reality slammed into Collin, his weapon now feeling heavy in his hand. His legs gave way as he crumpled to his knees. He had killed people. The realization was a hammer blow, making it hard for him to breathe. He sat, staring down at his hands and feeling like a monster. Soon his face was soaked by his inability to hold back his despair. The boy slowly crawled over to Collin, placing a hand on top of his knee. Collin jumped, not used to being touched, almost falling back.
Thanks, mister.
The young man said through sobs as he slowly got to his feet. It took a good 15 minutes for Collin to compose himself and get up from the road. He shuffled around the men as the boy searched each one for anything useful. They all looked like the kind of men that would have been buddies with his father. The idea that the world had become so horrible in just a few months was torture, and he had hoped he would not have had to become one of its monsters. Collin grabbed one of the rifles, an extra pistol, and as much ammo as he could carry. He only took 1 can of food and a bottle of water. He left the rest for the kid and began walking north again. The boy followed a few feet behind, and Collin simply ignored him for about a mile. They both walked in silence until his new companion decided to speak. He repeated how thankful he was for help and came closer to Collin. When the boy was walking beside him, he noticed a small hand reach over, as if wanting to give him a handshake.
My name's Anthony, but everybody calls me Tony.
He tried to smile through a swollen lip. The older of the 2 stopped and scratched his head for a moment, and finally took hold of the kid's hand. He shook it gently, not sure how hurt Tony was.
Collin, so are you gonna just keep following me now?
No, as a matter of fact, I was headed this way anyway. You might say that you are following me.
Collin shook his head and started walking again.
Whatever you say, kid.
They continued this way for the next day, mostly silent until Tony decided to spark up a conversation. It was usually silly things that did not matter anymore, like old television programs or comic books. Collin never said much, but did not completely ignore the boy. The way Tony spoke reminded him of his younger brother, and something about that was comforting. The two finally came upon an old farmhouse tucked back inside the tree line. Collin knew darkness would be upon them soon, so he instructed Tony to follow him to the structure. Collin handed Tony a pistol and made sure he knew how to use it, pointing out the safety switch on the side. He told the boy to wait by a tree nearby until he could search the house. The older of the two disappeared into the dark structure, moving from wall to doorway, with his pistol trained on anything within his immediate view. He remembered the basics of breach and clear tactics, not just from his father, but from so many years playing first-person shooter games. He hoped it was enough to keep himself safe. When each room was found empty, he returned to the front door and whistled for Tony to come inside. They made themselves at home within the living room. They were lucky enough to find a small kerosene lamp to fight back the night. Tony attempted to entertain Collin with horrible knock-knock jokes as they passed a can of Franks and beans across the small wooden coffee table. The scene almost felt normal to Collin, and he started to forget what the world had become around him. But with every sound from outside the door, his eyes would jerk toward the window. Each time he would search the surrounding area before coming back inside, and eventually the routine had become exhausting. He just wanted to get some sleep before they had to start walking again in the morning.
Enough jokes. Let's get some rest.
His voice being much harsher than he intended. Tony's head lowered before he slid back to the couch.
Sorry, just used to talking with my brothers before bed.
Collin felt like a jackass and shook his head.
No, I'm sorry, kid. I forget I'm not the only person to lose people. I should remember that,
he said before taking a seat across from his companion.
I don't understand why you keep calling me a kid. You don't look much older than me.
Tony was right. Collin was only 16 when the event occurred. He sat quietly for a moment, thinking about this. He had felt so old lately. He did not want to admit he had no real idea what he was doing, but he was afraid to stop. There had to be something better than what he had come to know, and he had to find it. Tony turned and noticed the fear in Collin's eyes, which made him uneasy. The boy spoke to break the tension.
So, how old are you anyway?
How old are you?
Collin said as he snapped back to reality.
I asked first.
Tony said, sticking out his tongue in mockery.
I'm older, so that trumps who asked first.
Fine, I'm 10. Well, what month is it?
Collin pondered for a moment.
Should be November.
Then I'm 11 this month.
Tony beamed.
What day is your birthday?
The 29th.
Same day as mine.
Collin laughed slightly under his breath, which was the first time he had done that since before the fall. They both joked about sharing a birthday party and baking a cake. Of course, Collin knew this was all fantasy, and probably would never happen. He knew that either of them could be dead at any moment, but he did not want to crush the boy's dream.
I will be 17 this month.
He finally answered the boy's question. Well, my friends, we've reached the end of tonight's chilling tale, After the Fall Part 1, by the talented Locked 334. I hope you've enjoyed our descent into darkness, and that you'll carry a piece of the Fear File Chronicles with you as you drift into uneasy dreams. If our story left you shivering and shaking, don't forget to like this video, share it with others who crave a good scare, and subscribe to the Fear File Chronicles for more haunting horrors. Remember to hit the bell notification so you're always among the first to know when a new nightmare awaits. As always, we appreciate your support and would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Sharing your fears and frights with us truly means a lot, so don't be shy to engage with our sinister community. Until next time, remember to embrace the darkness, for it is within the shadows that our most terrifying stories are born. Good night, and stay scared.